mentorship is critical, because go out and get yourself a good mentor, because that mentor, if they've ever done anything, they have contacts probably that you don't have. And their job is to introduce you to the right banker, the right accountant, and to look over your shoulders and make sure you're doing the right thing as you try and grow your business. Because you're young as a new entrepreneur, you're young to the business. That doesn't mean you're young chronologically age-wise. It just means that you're young to the business, and you may not have all the resources you need, and that mentor oftentimes can introduce you to those resources.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Career Education Learning Center podcast. I'm your host, Mitchell Rivers. I am honored and privileged to have on our show today, Chauncey Mayfield. Mr. Mayfield is the owner of Mayfield Gentry Real Estate Company. Moreover, he is a graduate of Tuskegee University and has received his MBA from Harvard University. How are you doing today, Mr. Mayfield?
I'm doing great, Mitchell. How are you?
Oh, I'm doing fantastic, man. I'm so glad you came on our show today. Thank you so much for that.
Oh, thank you for inviting me.
Well, Mr. Mayfield, tell us a little about your journey to owning your own real estate company.
Well, my journey started when I was 15 years old. I love music, and I played drums professionally. And during the summers, I just played around in bands in my local town, Savannah, Georgia. And my dad didn't think that was enough. So my dad was a lawyer by profession, but he was also a real estate developer. And he was building apartment buildings and that kind of stuff. And so he made me go to work with his contractors in the heat of Georgia in the middle of the summer. And I thought, what did I do to that guy? You know, but his contractor was an older guy who I was working for. And he told me, he said, hey, look, your dad's trying to teach you something important. Is whether or not you get it or not, that's the question. And I said, well, please tell me, what is he trying to teach me working out in this hot sun and doing construction work? He told me, he said he's trying to teach you how to have a work ethic, and he's trying to teach you how to understand construction one day might be important to you, and how to build houses. And I said, okay, now that I understand what he's trying to do, maybe I will learn how to build houses. And I learned how to build houses, and I fell in love with real estate. And so I went from working for my dad during the summers, and when I finished college, I worked for some other companies. And then when I finished college, I moved to Boston for my first job out of college, which was in manufacturing. But while I was doing manufacturing to pay the bills, I was still doing real estate on the side. And I continued to do it. And I learned a lot about real estate. But what I realized is that the people I was working for weren't teaching me everything I needed to know. They were teaching me enough so I could be beneficial to them.
Yes.
And I said, I want to learn more than just this. And I did. And over a period of time, I went back to graduate school to get my MBA. And when I came out of graduate school, I went to work for an investment company. And I was blessed to have a job where I was put in charge of the investment company's real estate division. And I got to see a lot of deals. I got to do a lot of deals. And I just knew I was in love. I was in love with that particular profession. And then eventually I said, you know what? Maybe I should just go out and do this on my own. And my first company, I started with two of my friends. One who's a fellow Harvard grad, and the other one, which was a contractor. And we built our little company around Boston, and we did a lot of deals. And until the market fell apart, and I had to go back to work because we couldn't make it. We couldn't make a living doing what we were doing. So I went out to Chicago, where I became head of real estate for a really famous bank called South Shore Bank of Chicago. And I did it there, and I opened up their Detroit division, and I was in Detroit doing deals until one day I woke up and said, you know what? I got to go back out here and do this on my own again. And I did, and I started a real estate private equity firm. Grew that firm to well over $1.5 billion. We bought a lot of office buildings and retail places and industrial places around the country, including in Charlotte. We bought 201 South Tryon, And a year later, we bought 200 South Tryon. So we own the entire block on one side of the street and then the half of the block on the other side of the street. So that's what I do. Now I do more consulting work, helping small companies grow their businesses and figure out how to get to that next level. I love doing that because when I was a young man, I had my first company in Boston. My grandmother called me and she said, "Son, I got a real estate problem. I want you to find somebody to help me." And I said, "Mama May, I can help you." She said, "No, I need somebody that really knows what they're doing." I said, "I think I know what I'm doing." Okay. And I helped her. She owned a house in a place called Nickeltown in Greenville, South Carolina. And they were building affordable houses. And for some reason, she and her girlfriends didn't want those properties built. So I did get involved. I helped them. And she said, "Son, you do know what you're doing." I said, "I do." And she said, "Okay, I want you to make me a promise." I said, "What's that?" "I want you to promise to help all other companies that come to you. I don't know what you charge normally, but you give them a discount." And so now that I am retired, I do work with other companies, helping them grow their businesses. And I want to keep my word to my grandmother. I give them a discount. They couldn't normally afford me, I don't think. But either way, I try and work with them and try and help them figure out you don't have to be a small company. You just got to think differently. And oftentimes, people don't have access to those resources that will help them be a big company. Well, I do, and I bring those access to them and help them develop some discipline in the way they approach their companies. So it's
one thing that I seen a segment, and ladies and gentlemen, we're gonna go over that segment maybe at the end, but I definitely put that on my website, is that you did with Ken Coons and how much you stress about your staff, how much it's important to have the right people around you. Yeah. How much was that important to you in your business, whether the first time small business or when you got bigger, they had the right staff, right people around you to see your vision?
Well, we may think we can do everything, but we can't. And I'm going to tell you something about investors, sophisticated investors. When they look at you, they look to see if you have a staff, because I tell you what happened one year. As we got bigger and pretty successful, I used to live part-time in Detroit and part-time in Florida. And I was living in Florida one time and I got this great, crazy idea. I wanted to buy myself a motorcycle. As I was out looking for motorcycles, I was looking at a Harley Davidson, the biggest Harley Davidson they made. And I was there looking, and one of my investors called me. He said, "What are you doing?" I said, "I'm looking at buying a motorcycle." He said, "No, you're not." And I said, "What do you mean, no, I'm not?" He said, "Let me tell you something, Chauncey. We gave you a bunch of money to invest for us and to buy real estate. You get hit off that motorcycle, what happens to our money?" And I said, "Well, that's a good question." I said, "Remember, I do have a staff, a pretty deep staff, and they can do what I do." And they said, "That's nice. But we didn't invest with your staff. We invested with you."
Yeah, that's true.
And I said, "Well, I appreciate that. But at some point in time, you got to trust me and my staff." And that guy told me, he said, "You need to do a better job of getting your staff out in front so the people can see that you have depth. As they say, you have bench strength. And so it's very important. And you can't be so egotistical that you are afraid to put people around you that are actually better than you." There were 3 people that around me, 4 people that were around me who were better than me. And not only do you need good people around you, you need to give them a stake in the operation. Make them a partner. I met a lady, an Asian lady, about a year ago. It was one of those drip centers where, they put the vitamins in and they put it in your arm.
Yes, I seen those.
And I needed to beef up on a couple of my vitamins. So I went there and she had this young sister who was outstanding. I mean, outstanding doing the work. And so one day I went in to get my drip treatment, and the Asian lady said, "I'm scared." I said, "What's wrong?" She said, "I think she's looking at other jobs." I said, "Well, what are you going to do about it?" She said, "I don't know what to do about it." I said, "Give her a piece of the company."
Yes.
Make her, you own the company, right? She said, "Yeah." She said, "I own 100%. I said, "Give her 2% and you still own 98%. And she said, "Oh no, I'm not going to give her 2% of my company." I said, "Then in a short haul, if she walks out the door, you don't have much of a company."
Yes.
And so you're going to be so greedy and short-sighted, you can't give her 2%. That's crazy. So it's not only important to bring good people around you, but give them a stake in what you're working for. They're going to work equally as hard for you. But remember, they're building this too. So I think one of the problems is we get so short-sighted and greedy that we don't realize that that person over there that comes to work every day is building and making sacrifices too.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And I seen, I've heard other leaders say, one thing about being a good leader is having even better people around you.
Absolutely.
And number two is that, yes, get them a state to where they will work even harder for you. You know what I'm saying? And it's kind of fair. You know what I'm saying? If they're doing that much work and they are that much valuable to you, just think how much more they would bring to the company if you gave them a stake. I was thinking 5 to 10%. You just said 2%. So I don't understand, lady did not understand, and a lot of people don't understand the value of bringing partnership in. You know what I'm saying?
Well,
like if that person that value to the company. I know one time I seen a show where the man said, and they was talking about getting partners. And that man said, well, we got to make him a partner. He said, why? He said, can you do what he do? He said, no. Then say anybody else do what he do? He said, no. Then that's why you need to make him a partner. You got to look at the long term. And if that person brings value to your company as an asset, then you have to bring them in your company, which means more of an asset. And then they pick someone under them.
Absolutely. You have to think long term. I started grooming my kids to join my company, and, that's also important. If you don't want to give it to somebody else outside of the family, give it to a family member. But you need to understand, a family member has to produce just like everybody else.
Yes.
Otherwise, you got to get rid of them.
Yeah. Yeah, you sound like a couple. I think Master P said that one time. Why can't he may be a family member, but he wasn't doing the job. You have to do the job. You have
to do the job, and you have to have the same standards for everybody. Nobody's different.
Yeah, because if they're different, then I'm pretty sure that's going to bring a lot of disgruntled workers.
Absolutely.
And you don't want to have that. You're already accused of having nepatism, which is really the American way, right? You built up, you want to pass out to the next generation, right?
They sure do.
Those big companies have passed out, from Rettenbacher to whoever you want to name, have passed out each and every generation. Sam Walton, he passed out his kids, and wearing out his grandkids and great-grandkids.
Yeah, absolutely. There's nothing wrong with that as long as you make them qualified and you make sure they are qualified.
Now, when you had one thing, you had a small company, you said you had to go, the first time you started, you had to go back to work and then you came back. What type of mentality did that take? That's good, because most people, if they didn't make it the first time to where they wanted to go, then they just quit and say it just wasn't for me. But you went back and restarted your own business.
Yeah, I did. What I realized very early on, I was not a good employee. I had enough sense to realize that. And rather than hanging around complaining, I went and did something about it. I much more enjoyed it. If you work for a company, you make that company $1, they give you 10 cents and they keep 90 cents. And I realized that, and I said, you know what? They're using my contacts, they're using my work ethic to make their $1. Well, I don't want that anymore. I want to make my own dollar, and I'm willing to go out there and make sacrifices to do that. The mentality was, I have a lot of education, which gave me a lot of options to go work for people. Well, my grandfather had a 3rd grade education. He didn't have a bunch of options. And so he built up his carpentry business. That was the only thing he could do. So he couldn't say, I don't want to do this. I'm going to work for this company down the street. No, he didn't do that. He worked for himself. And he provided a living for he and his children and his wife, and by working for himself. And I said, well, wait a minute. If he can do that, why can't I do that? It's important that we as a people understand that it's okay for us to work for ourselves, but we got to do 2 things. We got to prepare properly, and we got to make the sacrifices. You can't start a company and you just went out and bought yourself a brand new Mercedes. It don't work.
Not like that. No, it doesn't.
You got to be able to make some sacrifices and be able to go long term and say, I'm going to make this work. I'm going to make this work. Or just go and get a job and call it a day and accept what comes with that. It's pretty easy.
Now, did your education and your experience from previous jobs prepare you to be an entrepreneur?
Yes and no.
Okay.
My dad was an entrepreneur. Okay. My grandfather was an entrepreneur. And so it was more of what I was exposed to than the education just kind of validated or helped me confirm what I thought I knew how to do. And, people believe you know more than you know when you have a Harvard MBA. And they go, oh, wow, you must be smart.
Yeah.
and you must know what you're doing. Not necessarily, but you've seen a lot of situations where you know how to put together all of the business plan, the financials, and that kind of stuff. And the planning and the research, the marketing research. So you know how to do all that kind of stuff. So that helps. But what it is I think the best way to become an entrepreneur is not to do a startup, but to go and buy an existing company. That is absolutely the best way. And there are a lot of existing companies. Take the time to buy the company, learn the business, because you walk in the door with a certain level of income. And the question is whether or not you can grow that income. And typically, half a brain you can. So
does that also include a franchise? Maybe if you go for a franchise first and then buy another company, or that only work for if you buy an individual company, or I should say, a family owned or a non-franchise company, and then go build your own company.
Well, if you have enough money saved up, I suggest go out and get a franchise, because you get a lot of help with a franchise. You get operating procedures with the franchise, and you simply have to follow along and follow the roadmap that the franchisor gives you. You don't have to figure out the market. They will help you figure out the market, and you get a lot of support by buying a franchise. And there's some pretty, everybody wants to buy a McDonald's, because they believe that McDonald's can't fail. That's not true. And I know a couple of former McDonald's owners who, didn't do well at all. But, there's some simple franchises like the thing that's like a post office box.
Yes, I know. Yeah, UPS.
Yeah.
I know Subway is easy to start up. Don't take much of cost much overhead. You got janitorial services. There are a lot of franchises out there. How about a person that maybe work with a company? Let's say they work for a company in which they're doing, let's say, real estate. They work for a real estate company. How much does it help if you want to become an entrepreneur to work in that field before you become an entrepreneur?
Well, it's always important, and it's always helpful to have experience, because I don't care what school you go to, what kind of books you read, you're not going to see everything that you see when you're doing it in live time. And so it's important to get that experience and then jump out there and surround yourself with mentors, people that will help you. What people don't understand is people that's been in the industry are more than like they're willing to help you grow your business. Young people approach me all the time, and I help them get started, help them understand. But sometimes young people don't pay attention. They want to do it their way. It ain't gonna happen that way. You just simply don't know enough. The one thing that I learned the most about business is when the economy's falling down, you learn to be a businessman.
Oh.
When things are going south, you learn to be a business person. They don't teach you that in business school. They teach you how to start it up and run it. They don't teach you how to maintain it if it's going down.
It takes a lot of resilience.
It sure does. It takes a lot of coming back. I'm going back. I'm doing it again. I'm doing it. I'm not going to fail. That's very important.
And that's that mentality that you were talking about earlier, that you have to have that mentality to do what it takes to come back from that business if it fails or if it doesn't go the right way. I think entrepreneurs that I've talked to, other ones say you just have to be built for it, And like you said before, like any football game, right? We'll see if you're a real quarterback when you're way behind and you got to come back, right?
Yeah, back. And don't listen to other people. I started Mayfield Gentry and I grew it to $1.5 billion. And everybody say you can't do that. Well, why not? The man won't let you do it. Well, you introduced me to the man. We work it out. Yeah. Don't listen to that nonsense. Go do you. God has a way of coming into your life and helping you, but you got to step out there on faith initially.
So, before we end, do you have any advice or suggestions for young people that want to get into entrepreneurship or real estate?
Yeah. One is take the time to go and work with somebody and learn the business. You're not only learning the business, you're developing contacts. And once you decide you're going to break out there on your own, contact those people that can help you. People are not, most seasoned entrepreneurs, people that's been in the industry a while, won't hesitate to help you. They will help you in a minute. But you got to let them know you need help. And then find somebody, whatever you're weak at, find somebody that's very, very strong at that, very strong, and consider making them your partner. But ask yourself, what is it that I need from that person that I don't already have? You got to know that, because don't simply go out and get a partnership. I used to teach entrepreneurship. In my class would be 3 or 4 people come in and say, we're partners. I said, that's wonderful. Let me ask you something. what is it that you get from this person that you don't already have? And a lot of them couldn't tell me. So why are you doing that? You know, you want a friend in business. Mm-hmm. Well, that's not what you want to go your partnership interest for.
So what they had, in other words, was duplication.
Yeah.
Yeah. I've heard that many times. How important is mentorship in as far as entrepreneurship is concerned?
Mentorship is critical because go out and get yourself a good mentor, because that mentor, if they've ever done anything, they have contacts probably that you don't have. And their job is to introduce you to the right banker, the right accountant, and to look over your shoulders and make sure you're doing the right thing as you try and grow your business. Because you're young as a new entrepreneur, you're young to the business. That doesn't mean you're young chronologically age-wise. It just means that you're young to the business and you may not have all the resources you need, and that mentor oftentimes can introduce you to those resources.
Yeah, and that is exactly right. I have a mentor for my podcast that got me many resources, really helped me get off the ground here. So, that's something that you have to do. So, I hope my audience take away, Mr. Mayfield, how much nuggets you gave us, sound advice. It's just a breath of fresh air. I might have to have you come back on. You gave us so many nuggets and so many things that we need to counter when we came up doing entrepreneurship or real estate. And so we would love to pick your brain even more. But thank you so much for Mr. Mayfield for coming on our show. I really appreciate it.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for having me. Take care of yourself.
And I'd like to thank our viewers and listeners. Well, wait a minute, 1 second. Let me do this first. There is a segment with Mr. Mayfield that had on Ken Coos on his television segment about 8 to 10 minutes. And so we're going to try to put that on our website when we put your stuff on there and put it below when we do our thing. So y'all check that out too. That's a very good informational summary, how Mr. Mayfield and what he done when he came to Charlotte. Yeah. And so definitely check that out. I want to get that in. That was on my list there, and I knew I had to get that in before I closed out. So again, my viewers and listeners, thank you so much for coming on our show today. Yeah. And thank you, Mr. Mayfield, for coming on our show. Like always, with Career Education Learning Center, we'll be making your career dreams a reality. God bless.
God bless. Take care of yourself.